Hello and welcome to Book Lust. I'm Nancy Pearl. My guest today at University Bookstore is author Robert Macfarlane. Rob, thank you so much for coming to the bookstore today.
I am so happy to be here.
So tell us about your new book. Your new book is called Underland, A Deep Time Journey.
Yeah, it's been a long time in the writing. It's been a deep time journey, making it 7 years or so. It's about everything that lies beneath us. And I mean that literally. I mean the fungal networks that join trees into intercommunicating forests. I mean all that we bury, all that we suppress, the nuclear waste, the bodies that we put underground because we want to be able to speak to them when they've gone, or because we want to be able to forget those that we've loved or hated. We are a burying species, and we know so little about what goes on underneath us. So it is a journey through 4 or 5 billion years of dark matter, you could say.
When I was reading this book, there were several feelings that sort of came up, and one of them was how minuscule our time on Earth is, both as individuals and as a species. Yes. in the face of that. And when you were writing it, how were you feeling about the fact that in the face of this time and this little teeny time that we're here, why do we care?
Why do we care? That is the question. There's a question that I ask that isn't mine, but it's such a brilliant question. Jonas Salk's question. He says, are we being good ancestors? It's an amazing question. It stops you and then it searches you. And that really is thinking in deep time. What are we leaving behind us? What have we inherited, and what will be our legacies? And I think that's why we should care, actually, because how astonishing that we are here. Our units are seconds and minutes and years and centuries if we're really lucky. The planet's units are eons and epochs and eras. But we are here, and it's a miracle. And we are a terrible, beautiful species. And we are able to make decisions about how we are terrible and how we are beautiful. And for me, deep time makes the world more astonishing rather than less relevant.
Oh, I thought it made it more astonishing. When I was a little girl, we had a big backyard that was just dirt, basically, and we used to dig rivers and sort of watch the water go down and build islands that the water had to go around. And so in a way, your book brought back those memories of finding things.
You were a world maker. You were creating landscapes.
I was. And I played with dollhouses, so I created those worlds of people and their where they are in the world.
But we have become that as a species. I think that's the difference, is that we've all made landscapes for ourselves. That's a beautiful image of you as a map maker and a placemaker. Right. But now as a species, we are shaping the entire planet. We're creating rivers, we're subtracting mountains, we're extinguishing species, we're redistributing soil. I mean, this is the force of our numbers and our technologies is so great now that this is what we have to reckon with.
What inspired you to move underground? Because your other books, Landmarks, for example, are really about nature that we come in contact with,
yes,
or not, but is available.
Yeah. Well, the very first book I wrote was called Mountains of the Mind. I wrote that 16 years ago. I was just a kid, really, but that was an attempt to explain a passion of mine, which is, why go high? Why get high? Why would you risk yourself for a mountain? And this one answers the opposite question 16 years on. Why go low? Actually, we have been doing that for far longer than we've been climbing mountains. Mm-hmm. Early cave art, Lascaux, Chauvet, these places where cinema was invented 20,000 years ago, that we have been making journeys into darkness to make marks, to leave meaning, for longer than we've been anatomically modern humans. Mm-hmm. And that image of the cave, the handprint on the cave wall that we all know, which is a ghost really, it's where you spit ochre against the hand and then take the hand away and the mark that's there. I mean, that chills me
Yes.
because it speaks across time to us. This is an old story of journeys into darkness.
Were you the other feeling that I had when I was reading this book was terror. Now I know that you survived all of these journeys. Proof. But the thought of the cave exploration. There's an old British children's book called Five Boys in a Cave.
Oh, new to me. Okay.
Which you must try to find it. Which I kept thinking about when I was reading this. But it was, how did you don't have claustrophobia, that's clear.
But it comes sometimes.
Yeah.
But claustrophobia is amazing. I became fascinated by it, particularly how it can communicate through language. You can tell someone a story about claustrophobia, and you can see them their heart starts to beat differently, they breathe differently, they shift uneasily, and that, I was like, this is amazing. What a resource for a writer.
Right.
Writers want to move people. I can make them squirm. So that fascinated me. Do all five boys come out of the cave?
Yes,
Good.
I believe so.
Okay.
There's no, because it was written for like 11, 12-year-old
Oh, good. Okay, so
boys.
it's not, yeah.
Yeah, it's not, yeah.
But it reminds me of the story that happened a year
Yes.
ago this month.
Yes.
That was the month I finished this book, and you know what that was? The 13 boys in the cave, the Thai football team who went into the darkness with their coach because it's a cave. It draws you in, draws you down, and then they're trapped, and they all came out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a certain kind of bravery, I think.
That's one word for it. I can think about this.
How did you become interested in, your love of language is so clear, and your books are just a delight, almost whether the subject, it doesn't matter what the subject is, it's just the way you're telling the stories and using language. Where did that interest come from?
It came from poetry early, I think. Seamus Heaney, Ted Hughes, Gerard Manley Hopkins, Dorothy Wordsworth's journals. These were all writers for whom words were like pebbles or leaves or water, and they had a weight and they had a palpability. And reading Heaney's Death of a Naturalist, he talks somewhere about the pulp and heft of words. And I love that. I mean, I work my sentences obsessively, and sometimes that shows too much, and sometimes I hope it doesn't. But I'm interested in rhythm, sound pattern, in giving each sentence its own weight and speed and tempo. And I guess, that comes from these writers who first showed me that could be aspired to.
And those were all writers for whom the natural world was a natural subject to them.
Yes, that's right. Hopkins, I was fascinated by journal keepers, field note keepers. I mean, Hopkins in The Windhover, Dappeldawn drawn Vulcan, and this amazing play with language. It was basically like jazz improvisation. I mean, I think of him as the first jazz trumpeter, even though he never picked up a brass instrument. And so that level of energy and play. But I'm also a teacher, and I love communicating. I love sharing online and in my books. And for me, science finesses the world into a greater wonder, and I love communicating that. So there's a lot of time spent with glaciologists, climatologists, mycologists, people who study the undercity of fungi and lichens, and bryologists. And these people amaze me.
You have a new book out besides Underland, Lost Words, which is just a beautiful combination of poetry and art. But in some ways, the reason for the book is just as important as the book itself. So could you talk about that?
Yeah, it's not here, but it's about this big, and I wish I were responsible for the art, but that's by a brilliant artist called Jackie Morris. So in 2007, this really widely used children's dictionary took out about 40 nature words: acorn, bluebell, conker, catkin, willow, wren, heron, otter, kingfisher, birds you love, I know. and in came attachment, block graph, broadband, MP3 player, voicemail. And yeah, I know, well, MP3 player didn't do so well as a word, did it? Anyway, but, it wasn't the dictionary's fault, they're just a barometer. They do statistical analysis of how language is used, and children weren't using these words. Acorn and otter and kingfisher just weren't there in the stories. So we made this spell book to conjure them back, a poem to be read aloud for each word. And then Jackie painted this wonderful sort of pages of summoning art, and it just went wild. The book became a wild creature in the world, and there's now a copy in almost every primary school, hospice, GPs, surgery, hospital schools across Britain, increasingly in North America. It's being sung, filmed, danced, outdoor theatre. It's working with inner city schools, refugee seekers, asylum seekers, people who are suffering from dementia, another kind of word loss. And I think this has to do with our anxiety about our relationship with nature right now, but also the love of nature and of language and of art. So I don't think it's anything to do with me anymore. It's this wild thing that goes and lives its life.
One of the things I loved about that book is that in the poems about each of the of an otter, for example,
Yes.
the first letter of each line in the poem spells out otter.
Yeah, that was the first line. Otter enters water without falter, such a supple slider out of halt and into water. And that was the double sense of spelling, that this is a magical act.
Right.
It's also, as it were, a language act. But for me, language is magic, and for you as well.
Yes.
It conjures.
Yes.
So yes, the children spelled these things back.
What do you hope children will get? What do you? I'm sure they're getting it. So what do you think they're getting from that?
Well, you were right there. I think they do get it. It's totally, they're naturals at nature,
Yes.
right? You just give them nature, and not every child gets to nature. I think that's an important thing. Rural children, inner city children, some of them never see these things. So just giving them back a basic naming literacy. This is what this is. These are the creatures and the plants you share your everyday world with, not the snow leopards and the polar bears. They're really important too, but these are the ones that are with you, but are also slowly, quietly vanishing.
Yeah.
So that, and just joy, to see them sing these spells, to see them paint art, to see them pretend to be a raven, embody it in a performance. That to me is creativity welling out of children.
I think that your use of the word joy is something that I have always felt that it should be as librarians and teachers. I mean, that's what we want to give, is the joy of reading, or the joy of seeing,
Yes.
or the joy of listening. And I have to say, I remember the first time I saw a red-headed woodpecker and heard it, and it was pecking. And there's a poem that I read as a child about a red-headed woodpecker, and it brought back, it kind of compressed
Yes.
time for me, which I think is something that you have experienced
Yes.
too.
Yes, so that moment of reading and the moment of seeing
Right.
came together. There's actually a chapter called "The Red Dancers" in Underland, which is not about woodpeckers,
Yeah.
but is about this rare cave art from what we would call the Bronze Age, about 2,500 to 3,000 years ago, up in the Arctic, in Arctic Norway. And it's a chapter in the book where I make this winter journey to see these figures. It wasn't meant to be winter. It was a very arduous journey, and I finally get there, and I weep. And it is something to do with that collapse of moments of time, that these makers of this art had come to this hard place, winter place, with a huge whirlpool just offshore, a great sea cave, and they'd gone into that darkness to make art. And I, following whatever compulsions, had ended up there too. And there the dancers were there, just very faint marks in the rock, and they danced.
Yes.
They danced for me.
Yeah. There's in Seattle in the spring, the cherry blossoms bloom, and on campus in the quad. And I also remember one year walking through there and just feeling that they were so beautiful and so sort of fulsome in their in their beauty, that I just remember thinking, how could anyone, this is a ridiculous thought. And the moment that I had this thought, I knew how ridiculous it was. But I thought, how could anyone be unhappy in a world that has this kind of beauty that's available to everyone?
And that is free.
That is free.
It reminds me of Dennis Potter, who was one of our great playwrights who died of cancer in the 80s when I was growing up. He gave a last interview, and he gave it literally swigging morphine from a hip flask. And he spoke there about blossom. And he said, I look out and I see this plum tree, and although I'm dying, and because I'm dying, it is the blossomiest blossom that could be. And he's able fully to enter into its beauty. He's acquitted of all other responsibilities to the world. And I remember watching it with my parents as a teenager, and that caused me to fall into literature and into nature, and the two came together in that blossom.
There's another children's book, an American children's book called Miss Hickory, where in the end, Miss Hickory, who is made out of a hickory stick, is grafted back onto a tree, and so doesn't die.
And grows
anew into the tree. I think you would appreciate that book.
I will be finding Miss Hickory.
Yes.
We've done a lot of work. I've done a lot of talking with people through the Lost Words and through Underland who are dying. And I find their relationship with nature, dark and light, to be astonishingly profound. People in hospices and terminal care. And it's amazing to talk to them about what we hide from ourselves, what we bury, but also what brings us joy, and sometimes those are the same things.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we're seeing, it seems to me, in what's coming out from publishers a lot, not a lot, that's an exaggeration, but what we're seeing is a lot of increased attention to trees.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, we have the Pulitzer Prize winning novel Understory.
The Overstory.
Overstory.
Well, no, 'cause it's sort of,
Underland and Overstory, right?
Overstory.
And he's such a wonderful writer.
Amazing.
And then in this book, where you talk about the trees really connecting through the fungi that's connecting them and depending on one another, and which is just such an amazing thing.
It is. As I say, it shifts the ground you walk on, and it's happening right now, all around, anywhere more or less we can see trees and plants. There will be these the Wood Wide Web, which I just love.
I know, that is
I wish
great.
I'd coined it, the Wood Wide Web. And Richard Powers' incredible novel, so thrilled to see it win the Pulitzer. This book, all sorts of others that are turning to trees, I think they form a word wide web. They're interested in connection, in community. They're books which grow towards one another. And I think we turn to trees when we are lost. And I think we are pretty lost right now. And so it's no surprise to me to see a turn towards nature in both its connective and its unsettling forms. Because in a way, nature writing I always think is the most ridiculous tautology. Everything is nature, it's writing.
Right.
It's writing.
I went back to thinking about, after Richard Powers' book, The Overstory, and your book, and a couple others that I had seen, I was thinking about the Ents in Tolkien's book, and how real he made the Ents who have grown into trees, and how meaningful that is. Well,
yes. I mean, in a way, I don't think we need the Ents. Like the trees, they're already doing it. They're around. I mean, there's a wonderful line in the Overstory which I quote very briefly, quietly in Underland, where he says, Richard writes, "If your mind were only a greener thing, we would drown you in meaning." And I think it's that sense that the plant world, the world that we can't tune into and hear is, it's so profuse in its conversations and its knowledge, and just we don't know how to listen to it yet. We're just learning, just beginning to learn. But of course, indigenous cultures have been doing this with amazing attentiveness and fluency for thousands of years.
And we've just turned aside from that
Yes.
into other things that we've deemed more important.
Yep.
How do your students respond to your writing about nature and landscape and?
They're my acknowledgements. You know, I love teaching. It's what, if anyone says, "What do you do?" I say, "I'm a teacher." Teaching has to be a two-way conversation. Otherwise, it's lecturing or hectoring. and teaching is two-way. So I learn from them. I also, while I've been out here, I've met with so many people. I've been brought the most amazing presents. I think stories connect people across great spans of time. You know this as a librarian, anyone does. I've been traveling around, and last night I was brought braided sweetgrass in a hoop. I was brought the fossilized eardrum of a whale from 20 million years ago. I was brought a ventifact from Antarctica. I've been brought books, sourdough loaves. And all of this is lovely, but I think what it speaks of is story and connection. And we're back to the Word Wide Web and the Wood Wide Web. So the students are part of that. It's a mutualism.
Where did your love of words come from? I mean, when you read poetry, I mean, Seamus Heaney, I mean, there's all that poetry, but a lot of people like poetry, but it doesn't, the words don't grab them and define their life the way it has for you.
It has done. I mean, libraries is a true answer. I used to get off the bus every day after school. I had a long bus journey to school, and the drop-off point was outside a public library. And I remember going in there very early, and I was reading a book, and I slammed the book shut. I don't know why, that's just what I did. And this girl, not much older than me, I guess I was 11 or something, she was 12, she said, "Don't do that. Treat books well, respect books." And I felt absolutely, and I've never forgotten, I felt this sharp sort of slap, and that was a very strong moment, and I would always close books carefully. Yes, I think this sense of books as holding power, and that in a way has worked itself out in my own books. And so, yeah, libraries. God bless librarians, and I don't say that just because I'm sitting with you.
Yes. Are you? Do you write in your books? The books you own? Do you make notes?
I do. I love foxing them, and I love it when people pull out a book of mine. And they say, "I read this at 10,000 feet in the Himalayas," or look at the leaves I've pressed in here. I think books are to be respected, but they're also living documents.
Yes.
And that's so that they're archives of reading, and that's communication happening.
Do you mostly or only read traditional print and paper books? How are you feeling?
I let us say I carry my Lee Childs on my Kindle. I am very interested in Lee Child, but I don't feel the need to buy them all. But mostly I still carry books, and my suitcase I've traveled has got heavier and heavier as people have brought me books.
Right,
So.
and whale's ears.
And of course, fossilized whale ear bones from the Miocene. Yeah.
Are there other nature writers that you read and would recommend?
Yeah, well, I mean, last night I met the man who made me a writer, Barry Lopez, who wrote, of course, Arctic Dreams, About This Life, Crossing Open Ground, and most recently Horizon. And 20 years, he's shaped everything I do. It was a Y fork in the road, so I met my hero last night.
Oh, that's
and
lovely.
It was a very, very special time for me. So if anyone hasn't read Lopez, I still think Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek is an absolutely extraordinary book. And then there are amazing young environmental historians. Bathsheba DeMuth has written this book, Floating Coast, about the Bering Straits. Elizabeth Rush has written Rising, about rising sea levels. It's really exciting young political writers about nature in the broadest sense.
Do you think that writing about nature now, almost by its nature, is political?
Yes, I think it has to be. That is not to say it has to be polemical or manifesto. In fact, I think it mustn't be those things if it wishes also to be art. But art has powers that manifestos don't. We need manifestos, but we also need books and languages that shape the situation, that communicate it, that speak to the heart, as well as wagging the finger. I'm not saying Underland does this, but certainly I wish it to be part of that conversation and possess some of that power. And the responses to it have been like no book I've ever written before. I think it's the looking into darkness is something to do with our time now.
Yes, I mean, Underland is just, when you're reading it, you have this sense of awe that here are these things that are there, if only we could look into the darkness to find them.
Yeah, and they're moral, and they're mythical, and they're geological, and they're natural, but we find it hard to see in the dark.
Yeah. What are you working on? Something? Are you always working on something?
I was working on lots of things, but Jackie Morris and I, who wrote The Lost Words, so up from the darkness underground, we're now going up to the skies, and we're gonna make something called the Book of Birds, and it'll take us 3 years, and we want to rethink what a field guide is, a field guide for birds that are vanishing, species around the world that are vanishing, and speak to the heart of readers as well as to their eyes. Mm-hmm. And so I just count myself, I mean, I have all the artistic talent of a Dakshin, and it's so lovely to be working with somebody whose medium is brush and water and ink and can just conjure worlds up like that.
Yeah, but it's the bringing together the words and the art that make Lost Words and this upcoming book on birds, I think.
I hope so.
The power of it.
I hope so. Yeah, I love collaboration. I mean, we're back to the sense of community and sharing, and but I love working with musicians, filmmakers. I made a film called Mountain with Jennifer Peedham, this Australian director, cinematographer, and then Willem Dafoe did the narration, and it's just like, working with people with these powers, it's like, they're like superheroes to me.
I hope that I so hope that you continue these wonderful journeys and continue sharing with us what you find and your wonder and awe and appreciation, because I think that for those of us who can't do what you're doing but want to know, it's a great gift that you've given us.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to hear.
Robert Macfarlane, thank you for coming by today.
Thanks, Nancy.